what I was gonna do. I didn't have enough time. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, I want to welcome you. Okay, I want to welcome you to the Department of Social Work Black History Month lecture series. I believe this is the first time we've done this in the department. So we're very excited about moving forward with this over the next few weeks. You'll hear from a number of scholars, researchers, and practitioners about various aspects of the Black experience. You should have before you a schedule that looks something like this. If you don't, Valid is hogging them, I believe. Dr. Wingo Cox. So please try to fit as many as you can into your schedule. We can't promise that all of them will be recorded. We're also asking some of the instructors to offer extra credit, if possible, for those topics that are relevant to their course. So today, we're delighted to have with us Dr. V. Nikki Jones. Some of you may know and remember she was here with us a few years ago. However, she's moved on to other adventures, and she is now the DSW director at Spaulding University. So for some of you who are aspiring to go on and get your master's and then your doctorate, she will be happy to talk to you about the path you need to follow. So without further ado, our topic today is something that we have become very passionate about. Thank you. I get very breathless. I'm a little asthmatic, so bear with me. But a topic that we've become very passionate about and have been researching over the past couple of years. And we're still learning quite a bit about this topic as we venture into different sources, as we learn more about the topic. So what we want to share with you today is hopefully a working definition of reparations and the major components of what full reparations mean. Gotta come out the mess, y'all. There's still, unfortunately, a lot of people who don't understand what we mean by the concept of reparations. So hopefully you'll leave here today with a better understanding. The second thing we'd like to accomplish today is to talk about the major eras, the major periods, when there was a lot of activity going on around reparations. And it's been described as encompassing 3 movements or 3 significant periods. And then the last thing is we want to talk about a bill that has been in Congress for a number of years called HR 40. And hopefully after you hear about what this bill encompasses, you may consider becoming a proponent and an advocate for passage of this bill. We're not here to try to change minds or to argue the pros and cons of reparations, but what we do want you to have is an informed opinion about reparations. We want you to have the knowledge to make your own decision about your belief of reparations. So those are our learning outcomes for today. Dr. Jones, would you flip on to the next one? Oh, really? Okay. Okay, wonderful technology. So one of the things that we are still studying is social work students' attitudes about reparations. This is a study that has never really been done before. So we think it's important to understand where students are in terms of their knowledge of reparations, particularly social work students. And hopefully as we progress through the presentation today, you'll understand why it's important for social work students to sort of know what their position is on this issue and their level of knowledge. So if you are a social work major, would you please take a few minutes to participate in this survey? It only takes about 10 minutes. It's online. And how do they access it?
Yes, if you have a smartphone, all you have to do is turn on the picture and then scan this and you'll have access. The other way you could access it is by actually typing in the link into your browser. If you have questions, feel free to ask.
And just please proceed to do that. And we'll continue to talk a little bit as you're doing it, so we're not just sitting here looking at each other. But we have already done a study, which is on your additional reading that deals with social work professionals' attitudes toward reparations. So we know kind of how people who have been in the profession for a while feel about reparations or what their beliefs are. So we wanted to take it to the next level and understand if those practitioners, educators, social workers are imparting their knowledge of reparations in the classroom and on to students, and how do they learn about reparations. So that's why participation in this study is important to us. And we're doing it across several universities. So hopefully we'll be able to share that data, in the next 6 months, maybe? Yeah, maybe in the next 6 months to learn overall how students who major in social work perceive reparations, what is their level of knowledge about it, and where do they learn about reparations. The purple sheet that you have is additional reading. And this is some selected readings that we provided for you on the topic of reparations. Sometimes there's this idea that reparations is a new topic, and therefore as a new topic, must not be much out there on it. But actually is quite a bit out there on reparations. Matter of fact, we had a speaker here last year. Maybe some of you had the opportunity to hear her lecture, Mary Frances Berry. Mary Frances Berry, she's also on the additional reading list. She has written extensively on reparation and actually has a biography on one of the major leaders in the reparation movement during the second wave of the movement, which we'll introduce you to a little bit later. Okay. Let me know when 2 minutes are up. And raise your hand if you're finished. If you are a student on Zoom and you're able to see the information, please feel free to join the survey and take it. Everyone should be able to see the information that's on the screen. Is that correct, Scott? Okay, we'll take about 2 more minutes to allow you to finish, and then we'll get started. If you haven't quite finished, can you save and come back? Okay. Okay. Look kind of like folks are finishing up. Okay, as you're finishing up, or if you finish, we're gonna move into this segment now. The first thing we want to do is try to help uh, bridge an understanding of exactly what reparations is. And the first thing you need to understand is that reparations comes from the word repair, to repair. And it is a political concept. Okay, so when we talk about reparations, we're talking about a universally accepted uh, procedure that makes a government morally obligated to atone for past atrocities. Okay, it is more than just monetary compensation. Some people have tried to whittle this concept down to, oh, money is about a check. It is about far more than that. It is a process for atonement of violations of human rights. As countries, when we violate the human rights of other people, there is an effort to amend for that. So reparations is one of those ways that countries have used to make amends. It is not a new concept. It has been applied for different people, different groups of people, different countries. For example, after the 9/11 attack, the victims and their families were compensated, which was a form of reparations by the United States government, even though the US government did not lead the attack. They felt it necessary because of the human rights violation to try to make amends for what had taken place. Okay, reparation puts forth the argument in this case, when we talk about African American reparations, is that the US government is morally obligated to atone for chattel slavery and what followed. In addition to the atrocity of slavery, African Americans in this country dealt with 150 years or more of Jim Crow, which was so-called separate but equal. And we know it was separate, but certainly not equal. These are two of the major areas that reparations for chattel slavery or Black redress deals with. It also involves, as Dr. Jones will explain later, when we talk about full reparations, there's another component that's often overlooked, and that is rehabilitation. How do we ensure that the ongoing racism that is experienced in this country will or no longer? Okay, if someone's not muted, would you please mute your computer? Okay, so basically this is what we're talking about when we're talking about reparations. So the important thing is to understand that we're talking about a political concept that deals with redress, deals with atonement, deals with acknowledging the effects of government actions that contributed to the injuries of other people. Okay, Dr. Jones, would you flip on over? So reparations in terms of Black redress and to address chattel slavery and ongoing racism is not a new concept. Um, Although it has a very modern dimension, we started to see more about reparations in recent years. It really dates back to um, slavery, right after slavery. Um, During the first era, the post-slavery Reconstruction era, if you recall your history, and I don't want to, you know, throw out and flood you with too many dates, but if you recall, and I know you talk about this in your social policy classes, the Freedmen Bureau. After the Emancipation Proclamation, the Freedmen's Bureau was established to try to help the newly freed slaves. And you also know that it is considered one of the failed experiments of the American government, because even though slaves were promised 40 acres and a mule, for the majority of freed slaves, it did not happen. And after only a few years, the Freedmen's Bureau was actually shut down and vetoed. Um, Many of the potential benefits the Bureau could have had were vetoed by then President Andrew Johnson. So you still have all of these people out here who have no land, no place to go, no jobs. So as a self-help effort, African Americans actually took it upon themselves to start what became known as the ex-slave pension movement, which is considered the precursor to the modern day reparation movement. And this was an effort which ironically largely took place in Nashville, Tennessee, actually. One of the largest ex-slave organizations, ex-slave pension organizations, was actually located in Nashville, Tennessee. And that organization, the national spokesperson was an ex-slave by the name of Callie House. Callie House was an ex-slave widow who became her major source of income was doing laundry. And she was actually from Rutherford County here in Murfreesboro. I don't think there are any monuments or landmarks recognizing her, but she did a great deal in her efforts to try to lobby Congress for a pension for ex-slaves. And unfortunately, it was not successful. And without going into a lot of details, but you can certainly read the biography that was written by, as I mentioned before, Mary Frances Berry. She ended up, unfortunately, being targeted by the American government and landed in prison for a period of time for fraudulent some kind of cooked up charges to stop the movement. So after this, which ended around the early 1900s, the movement sort of laid dormant for a while. And then of course, we know about the civil rights movements and the efforts there. And one of the things that we often are not told, but is certainly recorded in history, that Martin Luther King was actually a supporter of reparations. Martin Luther King, in his March on Washington speech, if you go back and listen to it, clearly states that in a sense, we have come to our nation capital to cash a check And he goes on to talk about how the American government had defaulted on what it owed to the Black community and to Black people. And despite differences in ideology, this is one area that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King actually agreed upon. They both were supporters of reparation. The Nation of Islam continues to be a supporter of reparation, as does the NAACP. But one of the things that we got very caught up in during the 60s and the civil rights movement was the notion of integration. A lot of people thought integrations was going to solve all of our problems with racism. And as we know today, it certainly did not. So reparations sort of took a back seat for about 20 years. And later in around 1989, Congressman John Connors introduced a bill that became known as HR 40. And this ushered in what we consider today the modern reparation movement. And so Dr. Jones is going to pick it up from here and talk to us about the modern reparation movement and the major principles of reparations.
See the timeline? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So we're going to start here in 1987, and on September 26th, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America was founded. And in COBRA is a mass coalition of multiple African-American organizations that came together to fight for reparations. So their whole aim and purpose, and they exist to this day, is to obtain reparations for African-American descendants, Black descendants. So this really begins the modern era of reparations in 1987 within COBRA. And COBRA actually worked with Representative John Conyers in crafting or contribute to the crafting of HR 40, which was first introduced as HR 3745. So I'm going to talk about HR 40 a little bit later, but this act is called the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposal for African Americans Act. And the name HR 40 actually pays homage to the promise made by General William T. Sherman to allocate 40-acre plots to African-American, ex-enslaved African-Americans. And he actually, what is it called? I think it was Special Order Number 15 was actualized. Unfortunately, the president, I think it was it Jackson or Johnson? Johnson rescinded, was elected and rescinded. And so once again, African-Americans experienced that injury. Land that was granted to them legally was taken from them and returned to white landowners. So Representative John Conyers paid homage to that experience in naming HR 3745 HR 40. And so HR 40 has not ever passed. We'll get to 2021 and where it is now, but till this day, this is what we're advocating for social workers to support HR 40 because it hadn't had much movement. So as we work our way up, there have been multiple examples of the United States paying reparations. Now we talk in context as it relates to African Americans. However, there have been many examples of the United States paying reparations. They pay reparations, for example, to Native Americans. Now, a lot of the treaties and things were rescinded, right? and I won't go down that rabbit hole, but you can do your research on the United States paying reparations. They pay reparations to Japanese Americans. They've supported reparations to Holocaust survivors. And so this is not a foreign concept in the United States. Even in the United States to African Americans, there have been local examples of reparation efforts. And these have included, for example, $2.1 million package for Rosewood survivors. And you all may be familiar, some of you may be familiar with the film Rosewood that was starred in by Ving Rhames. It's a difficult film to watch, but I really encourage you to watch that film. And it doesn't even touch what actually happened in real life in Rosewood. Also, July 14th, another example, July 14th, 2020, and at the Asheville City Council unanimously passed 2 resolutions supporting reparations to support Black home ownership and business opportunities. So we have some modern examples, and there are many others. Universities have taken down statues. Universities have honored African Americans with renaming buildings. So there are many examples of universities pursuing reparations. It's not enough, it's not sufficient, but it is a step forward. So in addition to some of the modern reparations that we see, there's also a companion bill in the Senate that was introduced by Senator Cory Booker called Senate 1083. And this is, like I said, a Senate companion bill to HR 40. So to the present day, what we see is that HR 40 has not passed. So that means it hasn't moved outside of committee. What has occurred with HR 40 is a bill markup. This took place on April 14th last year. And the bill markup is where the House Judiciary Committee reviews the bill, makes amendments, and votes on that revised bill. This was somewhat considered a victory because that had never happened before. So that bill was ready to be voted on. Currently, that bill is not going to move because there's not enough Democrats that's going to support it. And B, you got to get a number of Republicans to support it in order for it to happen. And so this is where social work comes in, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. All right, so major components of full reparations. There are 5 major components. 1, secession, discontinuation of the offensive actions. And Dr. McElderry kind of elucidated this in talking about modern systemic oppression that African Americans face. Now, let me provide a caveat here. We know everybody probably has an argument to be made about systemic oppression, but we're speaking specifically about African Americans. And so we're talking about, for example, institutionalized racism, anti-Blackness. So stop it. I mean, you can't provide repair and continue harming a group of people. Restitution, reversing those injuries. There have been some examples of restitution or attempts at restitution. Example would be affirmative action. However, that's been whittled down and it's actually up in the Supreme Court now, right? So affirmative action has largely not benefited African Americans. Even though when people think about affirmative action, the first group that they cite is African Americans, it's mostly benefited white women. Compensation. Dr. McElderry also talked about this. Compensation is more than just money. It's also non-material. All right, so what do you think some non-material examples of compensation could be for reparations? Besides money, because when people think about reparations, they think about a check. Yes. Social programs, absolutely. Social programs targeted toward African Americans. However, these programs would have a curb effect. They would affect other groups as well. There's no way that we can exclude other groups, even when we create these social programs. That's for any group today, so there is precedent for this. Compensation, so thank you for that example. So, I was gonna ask, are there examples of social programs? What kind of social programs? Oh yeah, that's a great question.
Social programs that are specifically targeted to improving situations or the status, particularly economic, of African Americans. It could be free health care for a period of time, 10 years. It could be free college education for a period of time. So those programs that are specifically targeted to improve the conditions for African Americans. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. That was a great question.
And so what we want to do, but when you talk about, oh, I'm sorry. Often when we talk about social programs, they're either going to be of one or two types. And you know this from your policy class. They're either going to be means tested or universal. And so when we talk about social programs, typically what happens in this country is because we're not a country that favors universal policies where everybody gets something, it's going to be selective, meaning income based. So that's one of the difficulties when we talk about just implementing social programs for Black people and other people deciding what's best for Black people. This is about Black people knowing what their needs are and being at the table. And that's why there's a commission that's being proposed to establish an agenda. How do we go about reparations? I think sometimes so often we want to put the cart before the wheel. We want to plan what it should look like before we can even get a bill passed to say it's okay to look at it in this country. It's okay that after 400 years, America can apologize for slavery. So it's all about making Black people a part of what should happen from henceforth and not other people deciding for us.
I would add to that, that a lot of these social programs would address the disparities created by anti-Blackness. Like, that's why she's, yeah. Right, right.
I'm just trying to like.
No. Are you a social work student? So absolutely, that's what we want you to do, because one of our arguments is social workers should be at the table advocating and making these appeals to the public as to why these programs are needed, why reparations are needed. And I also want to be clear that reparations is more than financial compensation, but that is a part of it too. So we don't exclude that. Everything's on the table. And so part of this idea of compensation is also identifying who is eligible to what and how much. So there's also satisfaction, a formal apology, which Dr. McElderry already spoke to, for violation of human rights. This is very important because there's a distinction between civil rights and human rights. Chattel enslavement was a human rights violation. The United States agrees with this because this is a United Nations definition. And so that is very, very important to acknowledge too, as well as the continuation of anti-Blackness, for example, mass incarceration to this day. And there are many other examples, but it's beyond the scope of this presentation to go at length. And rehabilitation, identification of the form and measure of healing. You want to speak anything to that? Anything you want to add to rehabilitation?
When we think about, I think this is one of the most important components of reparations, because if you think about reparations in the context of racial reconciliation, then it is a healing that needs to take place in this country, not just for the people who were victimized, but also the perpetrators. And so healing has to be two-sided. It has to be not only the offended, but those who offended. And so I think that's the only way that we're truly going to get to racial reconciliation in this country, and to acknowledge that, yes, we have an ugly past, but we do not have to continue that into our future.
So now you have the context on the major components of reparations. I'm sorry, now you have some context on the major components of reparations, what reparations is, also the three major areas related to reparations. So now we're going to talk about HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposal Process for African Americans. And Dr. McElderry kind of talked about the fact that this act establishes a 13-member panel to really study how do we get to this point. My argument would be, we already have enough of the information. It's time to remedy, but that's neither here nor there. That's not how this thing works. That's not how the system works. And so the commission's main charge is to determine institutional culpability. And that's important to recognize, institutional culpability. And so, first of all, the United States acknowledging the fundamental injustices and inhumanity of slavery, the enslavement of Africans. Established this 13-panel commission to study the racial and economic discrimination against freed slaves, and authorized research studies to document the impact of historical forces on living descendants. There have been many, many examples of research studies, well, not necessarily research studies, but narratives. Well, there have been some research studies. Dr. McElderry has a book here, the work by William Darity. So there has been there is data out there to support the necessity for reparations. How much is owed is debated, but that's neither here nor there. So y'all have a little bit of context about HR 40. It was first introduced in 1989 by Senator John Conyers. Senator Conyers passed away. What year was that? Was it 2006? 2006 or 7. John Conyers passed away, and since then, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a Democrat from Texas, has been introducing HR 40, pleading with her fellow Democrats in Congress, trying to appeal to the existence abilities of Republican congressmen to support HR 40. And to this day, as I said, it had moved beyond markup, and that was last year. And I would argue that that only happened because of some of the racial unrest we saw in the country. And so there are a lot of performative things happening last year because people were afraid of what was going to happen in their cities. And so everybody had their anti-racist conferences, workshops, and I believe that was a precipitant to why we got to that point with HR 40. However, it's incumbent upon social workers to recognize the role that they can play in pushing forward HR 40. To this date, aside from the National Association for Black Social Workers, no professional social work organization, not CSWE, not NASW, not FSW, IFSW, has even stated a position on reparations, all the while touting anti-racism, acknowledging the part that social work continues to play in oppression, in exploitation of Black and brown students. And I say that specifically as it relates to retention rates, as it relates to curriculum. Social work has done very little in terms of action. So until we do more in terms of action, social justice remains just an aspirational goal. HR 40 is a concrete measure. It's something we can say as social workers we have done. And so what does it look like? How do we actualize HR 40? How do we support reparations as social workers? We've proposed a few ideas. One, educational campaigns to enhance knowledge of HR 40. This is just a snapshot. It's just a snapshot of what HR 40 looks like. You can go into your browser, type in HR 40 reparations, and you'll get more information about the bill. What we've provided to you is just a summation. Scholarship is important. Currently, Dr. McElderry and myself are the harbingers of this research in social work. There's nothing before us. And so more scholarship, such as a special issue in one of the profession's flagship journals, such as social work. Curriculum guide to aid social work faculty to teach content on reparations as a social justice issue and a policy priority. If you're committed to anti-racism, then you're committed to reparations. So let's teach. How do we guide students to know more, to do more in terms of reparations? And it's got a trickle-down effect. It's going to help students in ways to advocate for other forms of policy and programs. So I ask that you, as social work students, press your professors. What do you know about HR 40? How's this showing up in your policy class? What can I do? What are social workers doing? You can do something right now on your own campus. We talked about some of the what full reparations looks like: cessation, repair, etc. You know, that looks like pulling down these statues that are dedicated to ex-Confederates, ex-enslavers or enslavers. That's one way that you can actually do something today. You can draft up an email today and send it to your president and say, what does Raider mean? Where did that come from? What is a Raider? You ever asked that question? What is a Raider? Where did it come from? Callie House doesn't have a statue in Murfreesboro in Rutherford County, but guess who does have one? Nathan Bedford Forrest. Who is he? Yes, yes, he was connected. Yes, you're absolutely accurate. And so that too is an example of reparations. That's meaningful. Do your research. Who are the statues standing in front of the baseball stadium? Who are these people that standing there? Why do they get to stand there? Why is Reese standing here? I forgot the other gentleman saying, why are these people here? That would be how you actualize reparations. So I digress.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. I think we felt your passion. Okay, so now we open it up for questions. If anybody has questions, we are here to hear you, to hear your comments. If you don't have a question, just let us have it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and I think we've heard the controversy over critical race theory, and it is what you described as telling history in such a way that it doesn't make white people feel uncomfortable. And, you know, one of the things that I believe, and I hope that we understand as future social workers, is that African-American history is American history. It is world history. You can't tell the American story without acknowledging the contributions of African Americans. Although you don't always find it easily, the information and the data is there. There's no way this country could have been built and have the status that it does today without the contribution of not just white people, but a number of different ethnic groups, including African Americans. Do you want to say something on critical race theory?
I agree with you. I agree with everything you're saying about critical race theory. I think that like abortion and other single issues, people use them to justify why they vote a specific way. But what's your name? Rebecca, to your point, or to address your point directly, I would say that yes, absolutely. Just like you have a lot of outrage or an outcry against critical race theory, you have these new bills being introduced. There are ways just to bring the government. Everything's already existed not to make white people feel uncomfortable. That's why we're not talking about anything. That's why all the statutes we have up. So it's, again, why? Because why need a bill when that's already what the status quo is? That's the way the entire system is structured to not make white people feel uncomfortable. So to put a bill forth, to me, it's like, why would you do that? And it's like how we use other issues, whether it be abortion or before it was equal marriage. These are just ways to corral folks, corral these mobs to then go out and we got to make sure we vote and do this, that, and the third. It's nothing new, but you know, the fact that you are aware of that and you're following that is a great thing. And I would encourage you not only to follow, but to get active, to educate. Because somebody hearing it from you that shares your reflection is going to be different than them hearing it from me. Okay, so I encourage you not only to continue to be informed, that's awesome, but to do something as well. I think you had your hand up.
The biggest controversy to reparation is compensation. We live in a capitalist country where people see the pie a certain kind of way. And who's going to get more of the pie? And if they're going to get more of the pie than I have, then that's going to be a problem. So the biggest argument against reparation is the compensation piece. And so when you look at the data, even in our data, the majority of Black people support reparations. A large number of Caucasian people, particularly in social work, support reparations. The divide comes in when the question is posed, should there be compensation for reparations? And so you have to think about how you're asking the question.
And this is why we expand the conversation beyond just the financial piece to incorporate, for example, I believe someone stated the programs, the social programs, for example, because it is more than just money.
And the apology. The process of reparation. How to amend the wrong if you never acknowledge the wrong. Scott, you have something from online?
There are no current questions other than other people are wanting that resource page, and I told them that I would get to them. If anyone else wants that,
Yeah,
please see me and I'll get you that.
I don't know who had their hand up first. Okay.
I was just gonna say, really appreciate this lecture because I came in here knowing zero, essentially, other than the definition of reparations and that it was a thing being talked about. And I think I came in here, the only thing I was aware, the only part I was aware of was the money. And I, like, if you were to ask me beforehand, money isn't enough to heal. But I really appreciate that that's really 1 out of 5 pieces, especially like things like social programs that build their, like, for me, I like that's actually the thing that brings that healing piece to not good. I just really I came in here knowing basically nothing. And so I just wanted to say
Yeah, thank you. Nathan Bedford Forrest, yes.
yeah, I remember several of us over our team, when that name is
It's been an ongoing fight on the campus to try to have the name changed, but it's a political issue, and so it becomes very complicated. Scott,
Would you mind going to the chat section, Dr. Pardon, posted a link to Cali House. You can get to that. That would be great. Yeah, right there. If anyone's interested regarding reparations, and it's a school teacher.
okay. How many people are from Tennessee in here? How many people are from Murfreesboro in here? From Murfreesboro. Okay, how many people heard of Cali House before today? One person. So there's still much work to be done. There's still much more that we can do as social workers, as future social workers, as social advocates. And we need to challenge ourselves to look at how can I make a difference from the platform that I have. And that platform may be your family. It may be the students that you hang out with. You may have a bigger platform. You may be on the city council. I don't know. But whatever your platform is, use it to try to make a difference. And in order to make a difference, we must be informed. So I just want to stress the importance of understanding Black history, American history, because if you don't understand history, history stands to repeat itself. And there are some things we certainly don't want to repeat. No, the American government has never officially apologized for the institution of slavery. Well, there are people who believe that if there is an official apology for slavery, then it opens the floodgate for lawsuits and further leverage for the notion of reparations. That is one of the arguments in favor or against reparation, is that it was a legal system at one time.
See reparations as being on part, government care for veterans, population is small enough, financial impact not be significant. Furthermore, the government.
And furthermore, to keep I absolutely agree with Keith. I know.
And you know, I think sometimes we think this is so far away. It happened so long ago that it's like, why should we be concerned with that today? And the reality is the injustices that were inflicted continue to this day because there's a residual effect and impact. And I know I'm old enough to be most of you mother, but I can remember a time when my father, who worked at a job where all of the employees were expected to pay a fee for use of the YMCA. And because of segregation, the African Americans couldn't go, but they still had to pay the fee. It was deducted from their check every week. And so that's, within my lifetime. And if you talk to some of your parents, I'm sure they've seen things within their lifetime. And as Dr. Jones alluded to earlier, we know the impact of mass incarceration, but it continues to this day. And so these are injustices that are occurring now in our lifetime, not something that happened way back in slavery. But because of the institution of slavery, it's set up for continued racism that exists on into present day. And thank you, thank you, thank you for your presence here today. This is a topic that we continue to learn more about, but it is one that we think is very important. And as social workers, we should certainly have it on our radar, however you feel about it. But something definitely you should have an understanding of. And when you hear this on the news, perk up and hear what's being said and think about it not only from a personal perspective, but also from a professional perspective, because one of the things people like to say is, well, my parents didn't own slaves, we grew up poor, and lots of other things. And that's not the argument. You know, um, the argument is not who owns slaves, but the government's sanction of the institution of slavery. So we have to understand things from a systemic perspective.
And how that's contributed to privileges and continue